My name is Sansara Taylor. I'm a co-founder of Refuse Fascism. I write for Revolution newspaper, and I'm very happy to be with you tonight. This is Amaris. We're going to co-host.
Hi, everyone.
You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Amaris, and I'm an organizer with Refuse Fascism. I do some of the social media, as well as some art and creative work. So happy to be here.
All right, so we're going to co-host today, and I want to let you know right now a little bit about our program for the night. We plan to take about an hour together, so, you know, sit back, settle in. We're going to get into some things tonight. We're going to start with an interview with Andy Zee, who is also a co-founder of Refuse Fascism and the OutNow movement, and he's a spokesperson for Revolution Books. And we're going to talk with him about the intense times that we find ourselves in as we enter a new year. How do we understand this moment? What are the stakes of it? There's a lot that's been happening. I won't say more about it. We're going to talk about it in just a minute with Andy. So we're going to have a substantive interview. And during this interview, I do want to tell you this right now. We want to hear from you. We're going to take questions from the audience in studio. Hello, audience in studio. Thanks for being here in New York City. And we're going to take questions from you watching on Facebook Live and Zoom. So you can put in your questions for Andy about what's happening in Iran, about what's happening with impeachment, about what's happening with the OutNow movement, about what you're running into. And so we're going to hear from him first, and we want to invite you into that. After that, Amaris and I are going to talk some about the plans for making January a month of growing struggle and really building the OutNow movement and its mission, which I realized you were going to say what that was.
No worries. So Refuse Fascism .org is an organization. It's a movement that was started in the wake of Donald Trump's election in 2016. I remember being out in DC as a part of that. But basically, you know, it's about bringing people together around the unifying demand that the Trump-Pence regime must go, and specifically this nightmare must end. And so I think that, that's why we're here. We know that Trump poses a catastrophic danger to humanity and the planet. And that is what Refuse Fascism is all about. And it welcomes people from all perspectives to join in that.
Yeah, and so our mission on that foundation is to bring people together in mass sustained political protest in the streets that goes from hundreds to thousands and ultimately tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions to stay in the streets and create such a political crisis in this country that it compels the removal of the Trump-Pence regime because it is fascist. And so we look at things that have happened around the world in Chile, Lebanon, the resistance in Hong Kong. There's models all over the world of people actually taking history into their own hands to drive out hated regimes or change the political equation. And we're fighting for that to happen here. So we'll talk more about that as an overall, and also the plans for January to act on the stage of these momentous changes and advance towards that struggle. So that's the arc of our program. We'll talk a little bit, we'll take your questions along the way.
Yeah.
And without any further ado,
we're gonna start with Andy.
We're gonna start.
Yeah, so really,
okay, let's scoot in and I'll get in the camera. Like... You gotta come this way, and we gotta just move our merchandise for later. There we go.
I was like, it's weird asking Andy questions. No, we can't see Andy. Now we can see Andy.
Come a little closer.
Hi, Andy. So first, we wanted to get a sense from you, Andy, about, you know, we're entering a new decade. It's a new year. There's a lot going on. We're and folks are following. What is your kind of take and sense of what's happening? If you want to start there.
Well, look, we're facing, speaking of humanity, we're facing an existential crisis in several dimensions. Existential means that really the future of humanity hangs in the balance right now. One dimension of this is the climate. This is something that's been developing with the nature of the system, capitalism, imperialism around the world, and the fossil fuel industry, and what we've done to the environment. But it's been exacerbated by the Trump-Pence regime in ways that may not be recoverable. We see this in the last couple of weeks in Australia, the continent virtually on fire. Almost unbelievable to see what it is. We see this also in relationship to the danger of war, which has just been ratcheted up, and we're going to have to talk about this. We're at an incredibly dangerous moment right now in relationship to the danger of war between the U.S. and Iran. And there's just once again just a crock of BS of people feeling, oh well, Trump and the Iranians stepped back today. They stepped back, but they stepped back to do the underlying contradictions, which we'll get into, in a way that's extremely dangerous, and that it is not in any way resolved right now. And in fact, it's an extremely dangerous situation. And it's an existential crisis for humanity in terms of fascism spreading around the world, and including mostly concentrated or concentrated in a very extreme way in the United States, which is the most powerful country in the world, largest economy, largest military, and you have a fascist regime in power. And so we need to get into what does that mean as well. And as somebody who, on the one hand, I was part of initiating Refuse Fascism with Sansara and Carl Dix and Cornel West and others. I'm also the spokesperson for Revolution Books and an advocate for the new communism developed by Bob Avakian. And it's also existential in the sense that there is something that he's brought forward, which is a whole other way the world could be, that would be in the interest of humanity, and how we could actually get there. And that too is existential in the sense that people need to know about it. And those who do know about it and are excited about the prospect of a whole radically new revolutionary society need to understand that today we actually have to drive out this regime as sort of a matter of the ground upon which we're fighting in a first order of business. And that's why we're prepared to and are actually sincere about uniting with people from all different kinds of political perspectives, whether you're hoping that working towards the election or not. We are wanting to unite with everybody who sees that that is not sufficient and will not deal with the nature of the problem we're dealing with, but it does require, as you said before, a movement, nonviolent, sustained mass protest, meaning week after week and ultimately day after day to drive out the entire regime. So looking forward to the decade, it's got to be one, and it will be one, of unbelievable struggle. And if it's not one of unbelievable struggle, it will be one of unbelievable horror. And that's the only thing I can say with absolute assurance, that there is no good future outside of the masses of people here and around the world, but in particular here, standing up for once and in a sustained way in what's going to be a difficult struggle to oust this regime, and then to go forward from there in the different ways people see how to do that. And the revolutionaries, we have our way for that. But that's something, nobody gets to a different future without driving out the regime.
One of the things we're going to carve in a little bit in a minute more on how to understand what's happened with impeachment, what is the significance of this, what are the openings and the challenges of it, and also what you were describing at the beginning, the escalation towards war with Iran. But just to follow up on the last point that you were making about why people from different perspectives have to come together to drive out the regime, maybe you could say a little bit more before we go deeper into the particular developments of this moment about why the fascism of Trump-Pence requires the kind of sustained political protest to drive out the regime. Why does it require that as opposed to a different form of redress?
Okay, well, I'm going to answer that hopefully briefly, but then it also can be brought really alive, and we actually think about what's concentrated in these moves in relationship to Iran over the last couple of weeks. But the essential answer to why it can only happen if masses of people take to the streets and sustain nonviolent protests has to do with the fact that this is an intense struggle at the top of society. At the very top of the people who govern this society. The Republicans, on the one hand, which is a party that's been hollowed out, a ruling class capitalist party, yes, meaning that it defends this system, but they have a different way now under the regime of Trump and Pence to resolve the problems that the US faces around the world than the Democrats, their opposite have. But they are both ruling groups that have the interests of the system fundamental in what they are about and what they do, which is why you find people who say, oh, well, you know, some of this stuff started way before Trump, and they're right about that. Mm-hmm. But there's a qualitative difference, and they're fighting this out amongst each other, but on the terms of the system itself. And the Democrats themselves won't do what's necessary. These Republicans are filled with passion for what they are aspiring to do. Steve Bannon, Rudy Giuliani, and the whole lot of them have said they see this as the last chance to institute changes in how America is governed, which would vitiate, which means destroy the rule of law, the separation of powers, the way this country has been ruled up to this point, which, yes, has been a nightmare for the oppressed people in this country. It's a nightmare for those who oppose the US. But for a great deal of the population, there's a certain stability that comes from its economic and political position in the world, but also from the fact that they have some sense that there's a process, a due process that's being followed. All that is being shredded, but it won't be resolved within the terms of the system in any way that's positive for the masses of people, including that fascism comes through also having a mass movement of fascists. Mm-hmm. That are growing up within this and are now coalescing, even as they have differences, under this regime. You saw that in Charlottesville, you're seeing that in the mass murders, which, yes, are by isolated individuals, but they're led by what's coming out of the regime. You're not going to disrupt this without a mass political crisis from below demanding that the entire regime be removed. That's essentially why we are advocating what we are. And we're not alone in this. You know, people, we first proposed this, we said, well, how could that be done? We said, well, look, this is what happened in Egypt. But not in revolutions, but in mass political struggle that continues until their demands are met. Mm-hmm. We can do no less here. And in fact, we have a responsibility to all those other problems in the world right now. Hey, you're moving this thing too far away.
I moved it so we'd have a mirror. So mirrors move just a little inch over.
You guys move down this way.
We'll come in and we'll bring it closer. Okay.
Okay. You can see, folks, that we do not have computer-operated cameras. We are having to do this ourselves.
Okay. There we go.
We are both participants and the camera people.
He's a better camera person than me, clearly.
What do you think people see as the barrier here, like that some, you know, you talked about the examples in other countries, why that hasn't happened here?
Okay, you know I'm getting anxious to talk about what just happened today, but what are the barriers? What are the barriers here? Yeah. I mean, one is the fact that for a large percentage of people living in this country, their lives have not been disturbed to the degree that that they're feeling that urgency to act, it's unconscionable just because this isn't happening to you to forget about the tens of thousands of people in concentration camps. And I'm sorry, half of humanity isn't really come to grips with the fact that the right to abortion, even as it's effectively eliminated in the majority, 99% of the counties in this country, if they do overturn Roe v. Wade, and over 200 Congress people have just urged the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade, it's going to be a whole different ballgame for people. This is serious business, and that. But why don't people act in defense of the interests of humanity, including people who are living right here, preparing their food, cleaning their homes, sweeping the streets, the immigrants who are being deported and degraded and demonized and put into camps and their families separated? Why not? Well, because over the last several decades, this me first culture, you know, I've joked many times that the me decade is now in its 5th decade. Okay, this is, and people are only consumed with themselves, as Bob Avakian I'm an advocate for the new communism that said the selfie is the perfect avatar for this time. Everything is proceeding from self. And because people have gotten into a certain soft life in this country, being at the top of the food chain, exploiting the people of the world, that people are, have this thing. Well, if it's not happening to me, then so the hell what, and this is part of the problem. And there's a fear factor. The course that we are calling for is not one that's going to be easy. We can't kid anybody for this. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the history of this country, even the most basic rights have had to be fought for at the cost of people's mm-hmm. lives and limbs, and lives in the sense of being imprisoned. If you really want to be objective about it, this is one of the most ruthless ruling classes that never forgets. People who've been in prison for decades and decades for opposing what this country has done. And there's millions of people in prison just for the crime of being Black or Latino. So we have to understand that this is a good deal of what people face. But then what do you do in the face of that? See, and people do know, because they were outraged. The majority of people are outraged by Trump. And we've said, and we put it in a 2018 call, that if you're not as outraged today as you were the day after the election, then do not ask how the German people could have gone along with what the Nazi regime did. But right now, we'll get into why there's people beginning to speak out, including, who drew this analogy to good Germans, including she targeted in particular people who have disproportionate influence, people who are in the arts, who have public platforms, who are going along with the game because it's not affecting them. Not everyone. Patricia Arquette spoke out at the Golden Globes, and that was important. And we should actually promote that when people do speak out. So that's it. Maybe not so short answer to that question.
Yeah, no, I think now is a good segue to the first. We've been hearing a lot of I words. The first of which is that we'll ask you about is impeachment, and we'll get to Iran later. But what is happening? We know that there was a trial that Trump was impeached in the House, and that there is impending Senate trials. What do we make of all of it? How do we understand it? And how does kind of RF enter this conversation?
Okay. Just
let it go.
Okay, somebody's phone is going off. I get. One thing I just want to be clear about that. I'm going to move this a little bit so I can see. Amaris, you're still there, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Just to go back to how you began this broadcast. Refuse Fascism is an organization that has a position that this is a fascist regime. And we say, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. But because we think that the only way to actually drive this regime out is through mass protests, ultimately involving millions of people in cities all across the country, coming back day after day, or at least in the beginning, maybe week after week, we've launched a movement called the OutNow movement, which is a movement that basically anybody who agrees with the single demand, Trump, Pence must go, Trump, Pence out now, needs to be out in the streets, bringing their own demands into it. And so I do think it's very important that in Refuse Fascism, we be very clear in going out very broadly to people about what this Out Now movement is about. And we should be also very clear, those in Refuse Fascism or who agree with the calls from Refuse Fascism, about our standard relationship to this, that we are not doing this just for ourselves, but we're doing it in the name of humanity. And we see the existential danger that's posed by having a fascist regime. And you have to get that relationship between the Out Now and Refuse Fascism, understand that, because we do need to bring into this all kinds of people who may see elections, for example, as the way out of this. But we have to struggle with those people. If that's your strategy for this, it's no good as a strategy, okay? Because this regime is extremely serious. And as everybody knows, including them, people into that strategy. They're purging people from the voter rolls. They're redistricting. They will suppress the vote. And it's not even, and everybody will say it's not even clear that if he loses in a close election that he'd even leave office. He jokes about it, but his jokes are serious. That's what first of all, any joke is serious. It's just speaking about a contradiction that you actually have a little bit of agreement with that other side of the joke, the part that's funny, you know, so in this case. So, what's your question is why aren't people, no, about impeachment now. Okay, sorry. So look, I think impeachment is very important because it's a major step that was taken by the Democrats when faced with, you know, they resisted it for a very long time, but when faced with a situation where it was right in front of you, the evidence was right there that he was using the public office of the presidency to pressure another country to investigate who? His main rival in the upcoming election. So for the Democrats to not have impeached at that point, first off, it was attacking one of their own and their main person they were seeking to unseat Trump. Secondly, their legitimacy comes from an advocacy of elections that they say are free and fair. That is subject to some argument, but nonetheless, there's both the pretense of it and some aspect of real truth to it in the sense of having elections. Trump was saying, the hell with that. You know, you are going to go do our bidding to Ukraine, or you're not going to get the military aid that was voted in Congress, right, against Russia. Leaving aside whether or not, or for whatever reason, he has a soft spot for Russia, the principal thing here was this. And then he went and obstructed justice. He went and actually forbade the evidence from coming into Congress. This is another violation of the norms and the rules of the system itself. So this is why he's being impeached. Now, it's insufficient grounds for impeachment, in my opinion. I mean, it's sufficient grounds for him to be impeached, but it would have been better for him to be impeached on his full program. Yeah. Why would it have been better? Well, one, it's the pure accumulation of violations of the norms of this system would be making a very more powerful case for impeachment. And secondly, and even more important, it would be indicting the entire program, whereas the grounds they're impeaching him on are rather narrow and leave the rest of that program intact. In other words, he should be impeached for violating international law on how he's treating immigrants, on the right to asylum. He should be impeached for what he just did in taking out a leader of a foreign country on the soil of another sovereign country. This is a violation of law. This is a crime. This is an international war crime. That's grounds for impeachment, folks. So these are things that need to be supported. And when people want to go in and there are groups going down to pressure Congress to do this, they should be supported. But it's insufficient. It's insufficient to actually force them to do it. And in fact, the Democrats have conceded that they probably don't have the votes. Although Nancy Pelosi is pushing on the terms on which the impeachment trial in the Senate will be conducted. So that's important to recognize. At the same time, apparently, and I don't know if this is true or not, because I just read a quick report on CNN, that Schumer sort of said, yeah, we're really not going to be able to set new terms on this. And he's somewhat potentially, I think, already capitulating to McConnell, but I don't fully trust this till I read it from several sources. But the point is, you're really not going to change the dynamic in Congress around convicting him in the Senate and having him driven from office if you don't have the kind of political crisis that can be created. And let's just talk about this in a basic way to start. Imagine if there were even 5,000 to 10,000 people in New York, Chicago, the Bay Area, Denver, Santa Fe, Los Angeles, Boston, Washington, who came out 1 week, the second week, the third week, and it was growing, and it was becoming more and more determined. And you had a situation where you had that scale of protest that was continuing, and people beginning to, and in some city they probably wouldn't accept it, and there would be some repression. But then people came back, and more people supported them, and people began to bring, order pizza for the protesters and do all the kinds of things that needed to be
There's
done.
a fan of pizza in the room.
Then you start getting a dynamic where this becomes a different kind of political crisis that you do not get by simply going to the office of a senator and saying, if you don't do this, we're not going to vote for you. Okay, now that could be a threat in some close races that they would heed, a few people would heed. But you're talking about having to move a whole lot of people because it takes 2/3 of the Senate to convict. You need a political situation that's going to actually really shake things up in a way that would be, nonviolent protests. And that's going to be a struggle too, to keep in balance, because these fascists are not nonviolent and they're out there too. So we're going to have that kind of discipline in this. But then just think about what it would mean for there to be tens of thousands of disciplined protesters all around the country that were growing from tens of thousands to 20,000 to 30,000 to hundreds of thousands. Then it's a different ballgame. That's what we've seen around the world, and that's what we need to see here.
So one last question. There's more I'd like to ask you about the impeachment moment, but I think we want to get questions from the viewers and people in the room here with us. So before I ask the last question, before we open it up, let me remind you, if you're watching on Facebook, write in the comments a question or comment that you have for Andy. If you are on Zoom, you can go to the Q&A or the chat and you can type in your question. We'll be looking at them. Amaris has got them. She's starting to review them. Send in more and we'll answer as much as we can now, and what we can't get to, it will actually feed in. We'll get it on our website. We'll be writing more. The editorial board sees all of this, so it really helps. Last thing we want to give you a chance to speak to before we open it up is the second I, and it's not the I as in me that you are polemicizing. It's the I as in Iran. Major things have happened. I don't think I need to detail them all. It would be good to hear your thoughts on what has developed with the U.S. and Iran and how this relates to the urgency of driving out this regime.
Well, look, it's extremely serious. It's extremely dangerous. Michelle Goldberg in the New York Times said, the nightmare we've all been worried about since the very beginning is now here. She's right about that, okay? That nightmare is here. And it has not been alleviated by the Iranians taking a measured response today, and then Trump's speech saying that, well, that's good and we're prepared to pull back a little bit. It's not been alleviated by this. And there's many things in this Iran attack that indicate the fascist nature of this. This is a ripping, look, it started, of course, when he ripped up the Iran agreement that was signed by Obama or negotiated under the Obama administration, and whatever that didn't alleviate either the crisis with Iran, but it certainly did ameliorate it for a period of time and set some parameters for this. But his shredding of this was a really important first step in totally upending what's been done in the Middle East. It's been a long-term aspiration of forces in the ruling class to go to war with Iran. I mean, when this deal came up, Pompeo at that time, I guess he was a congressperson at that point, said that we should send 2,000 missiles to attack Iran. That's what we should have done. He's been opposed this for some time. But so today's speech, look, today's speech was a gangster speech. This was putting forward
Today's speech by Trump.
Today's speech by Trump, is to be clear, when in response to the Iranians sent 22 missiles towards air bases where the U.S. has troops, but that nobody was killed, and they just said this is a slap in the face, and it's not the main thing we're going to do, but it was just a slap in the face. And then he's indicated, okay, so now here's what you have to do. But let's look at this. Let's look at a couple of quick things here about that indicate the ripping up of the norms, besides ripping up the Iran agreement. One, in assassinating, this was an assassination by drone of the leader, a leader of a sovereign state. Soleimani was the number 2 or number 3 person in Iran. somebody wrote today, imagine if they had assassinated a vice president or a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in America. Can you imagine what would be going on here? Could you just imagine the response? Then we might actually be in World War III right away. This would be, that assassination is a breaking of international law and protocol. Now, it's true that Obama, following George W. Bush, Obama went wild assassinating people all around the world, but these were ostensibly terrorists, people he branded as terrorists, and non-state actors, even as one was a citizen of the United States, which needs to be noted. But it's still not the same thing as this. And this was done in another sovereign country without even asking them for permission. So that's a very serious move, and it's a shot across the bow of the entire world, including anybody who's in opposition to the US. Because let's be clear, the US was working with Soleimani in Iraq against ISIS. And they've been working with him as well as they work with all these actors, like they work with Osama bin Laden for years in the war in Afghanistan. So this is a signal to anybody who ever works with the US, if you cross us, we're going to take you out. You're not safe anywhere from these people. And guess who gets to decide? The Führer, Mein Trumpf. That's who gets to decide. They didn't consult with Congress. Now, I'm not saying that Congress wouldn't have given a rubber stamp to it. I don't know that. But the fact that you didn't do that is actually a change in the form of rule. It's part of what fascism is about. It's a change in the form of rules, saying all those decisions are exclusively made by people who are fascists. Trump is an instinctual fascist. He's been with his father. I mean, we'd spend the whole night talking about his history. But it's also important to recognize that the people in his administration who've been pushing for this, Pompeo and Pence in particular, are Christian, what we call Christian fascists, part of a political form of Christianity that believes in end times. These two people believe in end times. They don't actually care if the world goes up because they're going to be raptured up to heaven. This is extremely dangerous, and this is they do believe this. Okay, then they've written about it, they've spoken about it, and these are the people who are now running the country, trying to remake the country domestically and internationally in a different consensus. They're opposed to multiculturalism and diversity within America, looking for a white supremacist, a white America, and they're opposed to multilateralism internationally. And this speech, just two more elements about it. One is he went and overtly blamed everything that Iran has done on his predecessor.
Yeah.
Okay. That is a move that is akin to and a step beyond lock her up, which is what he said about and continues to say at rallies about Hillary Clinton. That has to be really grasped what that actually means and the implications of that within the ruling class itself. And at this point, I don't know what the response of the Democrats is exactly to this speech. I know that the pundits and the papers said, we stepped back from the brink and the stock market's going up again, but this is not resolved. This was a gangster speech, though. And he threatened not only that, but his the allies of the US and NATO, who he's discontinually, but then here he gives them and says, you got to break off your relations with Iran when they're actually involved in various ways in alliances with them and commercial. So this is very serious, and it indicates the fascist nature of the regime, and that it can't be relied on. And it does remind one of, I guess for the more recent generations, Tony Soprano. I hope some people also sometime watch The Godfather, but I do want to, because back in 2006, Bob Avakian gave a speech called "Bringing Forward Another Way," which is available in a pamphlet and online at revcom.us. Where he quotes Ted Koppel, who was a newscaster who made his business on ABC around the original Iran hostage crisis, including that's what Trump came up with, is we're going to bomb 52 sites from. And Ted Koppel wrote an article that what Bush was saying at that time was akin to Marlon Brando, who was playing the Don Corleone, going to a meeting of the mafia saying, okay, you can have your nukes, but if Iran 1 hits anybody else, then we're going to wipe you off the face of the earth. And he was making this akin to Corleone saying, okay, you know, I'll make peace with you, but if any hair on the head of my son is touched, then all bets are off. I would say that this is in that pamphlet, Bringing Forward Another Way, which is very important because it's in this pamphlet that Avakian talks about what we see, and this is only part of the world situation, what we see in contention between the US and Iran and in the Middle East is the contradiction between and the contention between a reactionary ruling class of an oppressed nation up against a reactionary ruling class of an outmoded, they use the word outmoded in both cases, outmoded ruling class of a dominant nation. And that if you support either one in this crisis, you actually you fuel the whole dynamic between the two of them. And the one that does the most damage in this situation is, in that case, a much more determinant is the US. So anyway, it's worth going back. I would just want to give people the recommendation, go back and take a look at that pamphlet. It has it's both prescient, which means it sees ahead into the future, and it's also quite, and in that it's quite relevant to today. So I think people should not let down their guard on the danger of war. And it does then impact back to impeachment. Because it's, again, with only the struggle of the masses of people demanding the whole regime go, and in that context, demanding no war in Iran. And if some people come at it through the other way, no war in Iran, therefore we have to drive out the regime, that's fine too. But they do have to be linked.
Great. There's a couple of questions that came in on Zoom, so we're going to ask.
I'd just like to see too, by show of hands, if anybody in the room has a question that they're going to want to ask.
We got a couple questions.
Yeah, let's start with
Okay.
in the room. Yes, you. Yeah, let's start here, then we'll go to just so we get a little live.
And now everybody will know why I keep looking this way, because there's people who are sitting over here, even though the camera's here, I know.
Go ahead.
So, Andy, this question is specifically. In your opinion, can we trust the intelligence community or not? Because Trump has said on many occasions, we can't trust anything they say. And then to back what he's done in Iran, they gave us information that Soleimani was planning so and so and so. So what's your opinion as far as the intelligence?
Okay, let me repeat that. Just I think it probably picked up, but the question was, can we trust the intelligence community? Many times Trump has said, oh, they're full of crap, you can't trust them, they're the deep state, but now he is citing them to justify his assassination of Soleimani, saying that the intelligence community offered him info that there was an imminent attack coming. So that's the question.
Well, look, I think, you know, in Refuse Fascism and certainly in the OutNow movement, people are going to have many different views of the intelligence community, whether it's the FBI, CIA, various intelligence arms of the Defense Department. People are going to have different views of that. And to be part of this movement, people don't have to have one view. But for myself, I think, no, I don't trust the intelligence agencies. But because they have the interest of what are they collecting intelligence for, and for what ends? They're collecting intelligence to protect the interests of an empire that has created havoc for the majority of the people in the world. But the word community is a nice euphemism that gets used in the media. It's not actually a community. It's a very authoritarian organizations that are the actually enforcement apparatus, the armed enforcement apparatus of an oppressive regime, in my opinion. I think that's what they do. I think there's plenty of evidence for that. If you want to look at the number of coups that they have sponsored around the world, and what they have actually done around the world, you would, might share that opinion from the assassination of the duly elected president of Chile, Allende, to Lumumba in the Congo, to Mossadegh in Iran, actually in 1953. These are, I'm not positive they assassinated him. I think they didn't.
No,
I think
they
drove him out from power. But this is what these people do. But the other problem with the word community is there's actually divisions within them now. And if you see what Trump has been actually doing, and the Trump-Pence regime has been doing, they've actually been fomenting and purging these police agencies of all those who don't agree with them and stacking them with sycophants, people who agree with them and who will carry out their policies. So even the press conference today was, I never remember seeing something where the president came out, who's the commander-in-chief on the one hand, but actually is a representative of the people as the political leader with the Joint Chiefs of Staff lined up behind him. So this is, again, a sign of the fascist nature of this regime and what they're doing with the intelligence community. So in particular to your question, that he's got, what's her name, Haskell, I guess is her name, right? Is that correct? Haskell, head of the CIA, to back him up in this. I don't trust that at all. And in fact, this is where it's very important to understand that all his, the purpose of all his attacks on the fake news and on the media, because who we really have to depend on is the work of the brave reporters, men and women who are actually trying to go out and ferret out the truth, not only from the reports of our own intelligence agencies, but also around the world. So this is a time when we have to be very vigilant and we have to search for the truth to be able to find out what this is. But so far, they have produced no evidence that there was any imminent attack that this would have prevented. In fact, it only made matters worse. Yeah, that answers.
Why don't we take one of these?
We'll switch it up.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So question from Zoom. Some people see this like wag the dog, just a move to divert from impeachment. To me, that seems pretty chauvinist as well as upside down. But what do you say to that? That question from Cindy.
Okay, well, why don't you tell people what wag the dog is, if you know.
Do you want to tell people? I think you'd be able to explain it better.
It was a movie,
Yeah.
and I think it came out around the time of the Clinton impeachment, and the idea was the president was in trouble, and so he staged a fake war to distract from his troubles. And so people are invoking this now, and actually Bill Clinton did do strikes on Iraq. Long history of US strikes and war and aggression and coups and invasions and occupations and assassinations in Iraq, in Iran, in the whole region. So Clinton did do strikes during his impeachment. So a lot of people have actually been kicking this around in the media and other places. Is this just a move? Did Trump just provoke a fight with Iran to get people to stop paying attention to the fact that he's being impeached?
Well, I don't know. That's one thing. That's my main answer is I don't know if that's why he did this. It's clear that he is using it, and it does actually. One, it knocked the impeachment off the front page for a couple days. That's one thing it did do. It actually made him look like a commander-in-chief. At least to his social base, but they would believe that if almost whatever he did, as he's pointed out himself. But it did actually, it was a move that actually put his opposition in the Democratic Party in a difficult situation. On the one hand, and it's a positive thing that they've come out, and Nancy Pelosi, I think, is trying to pass a bill right now that would say that they have to make a declaration they won't go to war with Iran without getting congressional approval, which, if she sticks by, that would be a positive move within those parameters. I think that there has been some opposition, but by doing this and provoking Iran in a way where they have very little, they have to strike back in some ways. That if for example, I remember watching last night and saying, if they actually take out a lot of American lives, then the Democrats, if they're going to continue their opposition to this war, are going to have to actually stand up in the face of that, which many of them will not, since actually a good deal of the blue wave that took place in the last congressional election did not come from the election of more progressive Democrats like AOC than the progressive person she replaced in very safe districts, but it came from taking seats from Republican reactionaries with Democrats who were A, members of the armed forces, B, members of like the Navy SEALs and the CIA. I can't remember her name right now, but she was on TV last night, this woman who was in the Democratic Congress. Duckworth, yeah, she was a member of this CIA analyst. You know, this is somebody who's, I don't know where she's going to stand if her troops are threatened, which is why, you know, as a revolutionary, I do bring forward the slogan that I think many people can unite with, which is that American lives, this is from Bob Avakian, American lives are not more important than other people's lives. You know, by the way, I don't keep promoting this just because, well, that's who I follow, but because these are quite relevant to the things that we're actually discussing. And, you know, if there's other things that people want to bring in from other people, that's fine. But this is right on the money of what we're facing.
Okay, so we're a bit over time, but we have an incredible wealth of really interesting questions. So we're going to try to squeeze in one more and ask you to, you know, let's do it as quickly as we can. And then we have a little bit more we got to talk about, looking forward to act on this situation. So hang with us. But Amaris is going to read the last question tonight.
And this is from Facebook. Doesn't that play right into Trump's hands? He's already calling socialists God haters. The danger of equating Christianity with fascism is that it puts us into a conflict between Christianity and the rest of us. It appeals to anti-Christian sentiment on the left. If we allow Trump to make us out to be Christian haters with our help, then we are helping Trump win.
Well, I think it's, I think it's, you know, in one sense I can just say, I'm sorry, the world is complicated, okay? The world's complex. We're not opposing people who are Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Hindus for their religion, okay? We are pointing out that there is a movement that has been fostered in this country and grown up over the last 40 years, since the time of Reagan, that is a particular political form of Christian fundamentalism. And not even every evangelical Christian is part of this movement. In fact, there are splits happening in many of the churches over this. I can't remember now who just split.
The Methodists just split.
The Methodists just split. They weren't fundamentalists on either side.
Evangelical Christianity Today just came out with the...
Yeah, in Christianity Today, which is a right-wing Christian publication, but it actually, well, it's been more liberal. Anyway, we don't have to get into the intricacies of it, but the point that's misguided in the question, or that's wrong in the question, is Trump is going to say what Trump is going to say, okay? You know, he's going to say that. He's going to say everybody is you know, Satan and a communist, and they'll call you that he's called the left fascists and Hitler. This is what these people will do. The question is what's true, and I think we do have to be very clear that there are many people whose Christian faith leads them to fight against injustice. In fact, many of the people who are taking up immigrant rights are people who do so on the basis of their Christian or Jewish faith. There's Jewish students out there all over the place now with their never again applying the lessons of the Holocaust and what was faced by Jewish people to the situation that what the Trump regime is doing to immigrants. Doesn't mean we're against, you know, the question doesn't sustain itself because there is a political Christian movement that is anti-gay, anti-woman, anti-immigrant, anti-Black and Latino, and this is a fact. And you have to go no further than the Vice President of the United States and see what he says and how he lives his life and the laws he's passed, or go to the Attorney General who wants to establish a theocratic law in this country. Go to Mike Pompeo and the things he said. This is not, again, an anti-Christian position of refuse fascism, but it's actually describing the actual nature of this movement. And you know, if people want to get a deeper understanding of this, there is the film that the Trump-Pence regime must go by Bob Avakian. But we also have a pamphlet that's been published called The Trump-Pence Regime, Racing Towards Theocracy at an Accelerating Pace, the Under-the-Radar Move to a Christian Fascist Theocratic USA, published by the website revcom.us. So I would suggest that the questioner take a look at that publication. And it is very important that people get into this because that's where the organization comes for this movement. That's why it, you know, and it actually, by the way, turns to the question that was asked here, this Christian fascist movement, this theocratic movement is way up in the US military, as well as into many police agencies. And it actually is what coheres. There's groups like the Oath Keepers and the Promise Keepers that enforce this around the country. And so to say, well, we don't want to be accused of this by Trump, therefore we're going to ignore what is the main organized fascist force outside the government is a fool's errand.
All right, well, I want to say thank you, Andy. And like we said before, there's a lot of questions here in the room. We didn't call on you, and online who sent in, and we're going to take them all down and we're going to share them with the editorial board. We'll share them probably with many of you in the organization, and we're going to continue the conversation online about how do we get organized, how do we understand this. There were some really good questions, so we'll do more, and we'll be back next week. We're every week, the Wednesday webinars out now, but we're not done. We do have more ground to cover here today. So the implication of everything we've been talking about, we are in this emergency situation, and it is a qualitative change. That's part of the Christian fascism too. It's a form of theocratic rule. We're in a qualitative change in the form of rule, the move towards consolidation of fascism. I think we've got a deeper understanding of it through this discussion. The remedy that Refuse Fascism has come together around, and that the OutNow movement is inviting everybody and urging everybody who does not want to accept a fascist America, who wants Trump, Pence out now, to take this demand up. The remedy is a mass, sustained, nonviolent struggle from below in this society. That is sustained means coming back day after, starting probably week after week, but eventually day after day, and growing. From hundreds coming back week after week to thousands coming back week after week across the country, to tens of thousands, to hundreds of thousands, and ultimately millions who are in the streets refusing to stop raising the demand, Trump, Pence, out now. And we'll be raising, Refuse Fascism will be raising the slogan, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. And we are calling on everybody from different perspectives, different movements, different backgrounds, people who've never been in a movement, to bring their demands, their perspective, their community into the OutNow struggle, and to take up OutNow into whatever it is that they're already working on. You're doing a program from MLK, for MLK Day, bring the OutNow, make it part of your demands. You're doing a protest around immigrant rights, bring OutNow into it. And then come out to the weekly convergences that we are calling. Ultimately, you need millions. You need to create that political crisis from below. Last weekend, we had a discussion here in this room where we're broadcasting from, part of the mass meetings we held across the country. And somebody pointed out, look, the majority of the people in this country, if you wanted to get down to the raw numbers, they were making the argument, probably majority really hates, is deeply disturbed by what's happening. There are tens of millions, probably over 100 million, who are really opposed to what is being done to Trump, Pence, but they're not acting on it in any way commensurate. This is a problem we're working on solving. And I think when we go out and tell people, millions in the streets, and you see it online a lot, we need millions in the streets. We need to do what they've done in Lebanon. We need to do what they've done in Puerto Rico. We need to do what they're doing around the world. A lot of people have that idea, and then they say, well, that's not happening. So this is where our plan and our strategy comes in, is we actually are fighting to go from a situation where there is a huge reservoir of opposition to Trump, Pence, but it's passive and it's accepting and it's going along, while the Trump people are out there fighting and changing facts on the ground every day, to a situation where the OutNow movement is growing. It's on the map. We launched it in October. We built up some sustained protests. We've modeled the kind of resistance we need coming back week after week. We've built up cores around the country. We've learned some things. It's very important, but we have to, in January, make a big advance. And so this is where the January plans are. How do we go from where we are to a position where we're getting the dynamic going towards the growth and sustained nonviolent protest to drive them out? And we're doing it in January against a backdrop of enormous change and volatility. And I'll just say, in addition to what we've talked about, the impeachment has woken a lot of people up. That's one of the byproducts of this. The threat and the strike against Iran has aroused people in a new way. We're living through a jolt, and the normalcy is being disrupted. It should never have been normalized, but the normalization is being disrupted. And if ever there was a need for the OutNow struggle to be growing. It is now. But also, if ever there was an opportunity, my God, this is a moment to seize. So everything that we're about to talk about, and I'm going to lay out the January plans, they're on our website, refusefascism.org. But I want us to think about them in light of everything that we've been talking about. The stakes and the motion and the opportunity to seize among the people. So we have a program of a struggle for the entire month of January. And we're calling on everybody who is watching to take this up and to become and throw all in this month. And go out to people you know, people who've worked with this in the past, people we're meeting right now, and bring them into this. January 11th, that's this Saturday. We're having protests across the country to raise the demand, Trump, Pence out now, in the streets, in our numbers, with also the slogan, no war on Iran. The lead slogan is Trump, Pence out now. That's what unifies and can resolve this whole knot of crimes. But we're also raising, because the imminence of this threat, no war on Iran. We stand with the people of Iran. And we have to go to everybody. It's very important. There's been thousands of people in the streets. And today people were in the streets again against a war on Iran. We have to call them into this. And we really have to get the word out in a massive way on social media, on text services, on the streets. People here in New York were out on the trains today on the street protesting. They got an incredible response. There's a lot of hunger for this right now. We have to let people know there's a vehicle. This is a very important thing. Then it's not a one-off. We're building struggle. Every week we have new plans. And the idea is to actually build momentum and bring people, and not just win people to come to one thing or another thing, although people will do that, and that's good. But to have as many people as possible understand this is part of a strategy to get thousands and then millions, so people are making that commitment to come back and work on this. People drop their plans and people rearrange their lives to campaign all the time on political campaigns for this or that candidate. We are calling on, look, a lot of people are going to be involved who don't drop everything, but we're calling on people to actually become part of this movement in an ongoing way, week after week, and organizing others. So January 11th, nationwide protests, and we've got them planned in about 9 cities. We'd like to have 20 cities. Write in on our website. Let us know where you're protesting. We will put it up and we'll let people know to join you. January 18th, across the country, is the Women's March. This is going to be an outpouring. These have been outpourings of many, many thousands, hundreds of thousands. The first one was millions. People will be, I think, especially now with impeachment, with the Iran situation, there's going to be people who are aroused and out there. And OutNow needs to have not just little showings of people handing out flyers. We need mass contingents of people who are new in this movement coming out together with huge banners. Not just take the banner we've already got and get a few people who's going to carry it and a few people to hand out flyers, but we need contingents. I would like to see hundreds of people marching with several enormous OutNow Refuse Fascism banners together in DC. Hundreds of people in the t-shirts stickered out with hundreds of thousands of flyers to get out to others, and march together, take buses together from Philly, from New York City, from wherever you can get there, and converge and represent this movement as a force that is actually on the ground. The people say, I wish there was somebody who would drive. I see it all the time. I wish there was a force we could join with that's driving them out. We need to represent as that force and draw others into it. And across the country, in DC, we should be a big mobilization, and then across the country. And I really want to emphasize, right after the 11th, right after this Saturday, after we're in the streets, we have to get together with people and strategize. How are we getting hundreds more next week to march with us? Really make a leap. If ever there was a moment for exponential growth, this is that moment. So the 11th, and then on a much bigger scale on the 18th. And then on the 25th, we had already planned, because we're doing week after week, different forms, but continuing to come back and growing in our impact and in our numbers. The 25th is the last Saturday of the month. And we have been planning our final week of culminating protests for January, which is to get us to a new plateau to go forward on a higher level in February and on from there. There has now been anti-war protests called across the country. And every indication is that these will be significant protests, and they should be. That is very important. So we're still working on this, but we feel right now our proposal that we want to put forward is that we have feeder marches and rallies that go into these as big OutNow contingents. Again, not just a little spec our group and their group and their group, but actually bringing in the OutNow message and representing for it in an independent way and in a way that strengthens this movement and unites with the anti-war movement, but actually brings in this demand, because we, you know, each day, each week is a new crime against humanity from this regime. And we have said from the beginning, we cannot just respond to them one after the next after the next. We have to do that, but we also have to go to the source, which is the regime as a whole. So we're building through a month of struggle. This Saturday, this Saturday everywhere, Trump, Pence out now in the streets, marches, no war in Iran. Next Saturday, major contingents at the Women's March, out now. And then the final Saturday, rallies and feeder marches that are part of the anti-war protests, raising the demand, Trump, Pence out now. And the very next day, the 26th, which is a Sunday, we want to have chapters all over the country and new chapters, call emergency meetings or mass meetings to bring everybody we've met through the whole month, including the day before at the protest, to come to another mass meeting that gets organized on a bigger scale. And we should have 100 people, 200 people. We should have a lot of people at these meetings to plan on a whole different level going forward. It is really what the world needs from us. So this is the nodal points of the month. There's two other things I want to say about the month, and then we're going to hear a few words from Amaris on a very important, critical part of going forward as well. And one is that there will be emergency developments. And so stay tuned to our website, refusefascism.org. There'll be crazy, unpredictable things that develop around impeachment, around Iran, around things we don't even know about yet. And we'll be responding. There'll be emergent things that make demands on us, and we'll be working together through the webinars and through the website to coordinate that nationally. And two, we will be sending people down to DC for the Senate trial. We put this off. We haven't pinned down the details because there's been a lot of flux, and it's very unclear when it's going to actually start happening. But as soon as we know and as soon as we have a plan, we're going to put it out. But we want you now to, wherever you are in the country, think about volunteering to come to DC and represent Trump, Pence out now there during the Senate trial. And think about raising money to send people to DC, because it costs money for housing, for transportation, for everything to have a major out now presence down there. So this is the vision for the month. And that's what I want to share with you. Really, we have to go out to as broadly everywhere we can. There's a lot of new people who can be brought forward in this right now. Yeah. And then the last thing, very important, from Amaris.
Yes, no, so I think we have heard a lot of the plans for January, and there's some more developments as the month goes along that we'll, share on refusefascism.org. What do we need to make this happen? Since Sarah brought up the Senate trial and sending people to DC in buses, similarly with the Women's March on the 18th, we want to, how do we get a massive contingent out to DC? Same, we need funds to get people on buses for the day. We also have amazing stickers, which are right here. I will show you the orange stickers if you haven't seen them. They look a shade of yellow on camera, but they are bright orange, and these are out all over the city. I know I see them all the time, and I'm sure people see them in their communities, but we need a lot more of these out, and we need to print them. They're stickers. We also have these hats. One I'm wearing, you can see #OutNow. These are another way that we're fundraising, and there's a lot of different ways to get involved, but certainly we need the funds to make the materials, the banners, the flyers, and all of that. And so we're asking for you tonight, now, to make a donation to Refuse Fascism, and you can do that several ways. One easy way is on Venmo, refuse-fascism. So if you get on your phone, get on Venmo, thank you, Vanna White, refuse-fascism, or donate.refusefascism.org. And if you need the 4-digit number, sometimes they ask on Venmo, it's 1286. Those are the last 4 digits of our phone number. And it's backwards, but donate.
It's forwards to them.
Oh, okay, cool. Even better. Donate.refusefascism.org to make a donation via PayPal or credit card, and then you have your Venmo option as well. So again, any way that you can contribute means a lot. We've been asking people and challenging people to donate for 2020, $20.20. So if you want to donate at that level, or if you have $2,020, that would be great as well. So really stretch beyond, you know, your limitations and really dig in your pockets and make that happen. So thank you.
Wait,
That's all.
things.
Oh, I also have fun things. So as part of the Women's March, people might remember these hats. These are actually handmade, and we only have 3 of these. And actually tonight we have a little challenge. So if you donate $50 and just indicate that you're interested in this hat, we will send this hat to you. We'll make that happen.
It was made by a professor at the Fashion Institute here in New York.
And they're very soft
They're
and
really nice.
comfy.
There you go.
And they're pretty.
50's a bargain.
Yeah,
50 is a bargain.
that's true.
Should be 100.
Should give 100 for the hat. There's only 3 of them left. They're really nice. And they say no.
And they say no.
Refusefascism.org.
There you go.
There you go.
And then the other thing we got an amazing artist who donated this piece. Her name is Taylor Ruppin, urbaneartlife.com, and she's on Instagram as well. This is a piece that we are asking, we're starting an auction for it. And we're starting the auction at $100. So please, if you are interested in contributing to that auction, you can go on our donate page and do so there.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so thank you for tuning in. Refusefascism.org, #OutNow, use it all week, get in the streets, and we'll be back next week every Wednesday this month.
Yeah.